there are those whose lives will not be forgotten for one reason or another. With us today is one man whose life story will leave an imprint on you forever. Not just because of what he did, but because of what was done to him. It is my honor to introduce Louis Zamperini. Louis is an Olympic athlete, World War II POW, and a true American hero, whose heralding life story was recently chronicled by the Pulitzer Prize-winning author Laura Hillenbrand in the book Unbroken. And now we have the great opportunity to hear this unbelievable and moving story from the man himself. Louis, welcome to success. This is a great honor.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be with you.
So the story most people know, Louis, it begins being lost at sea and it goes from there. But in reality, your story begins before that, when you were young and were a quote-unquote troublemaker, always getting into trouble. So tell us about that part of your life, and what was the turning point for you where you changed your ways?
Well, I was an obstinate and rebellious kid. You might call me a rotten kid. That's about what I was. Always in trouble and always fighting, and formed a gang and began to steal things and hijack liquor from the bootleggers. Of course, this was during Prohibition, so they couldn't turn you in. And my parents had an awful rough time with me. My brother was just the opposite. I had a good family, 2 wonderful sisters, but I was what you call the black sheep in the family.
I guess if anybody's listening out there and have troubled children, that this story still could work out quite well. So what encouraged you to start running? How did running change your outlook on life at such a young age?
Well, first of all, the police were always chasing me all over town, and my brother finally took me to the police station, and the chief had 2 guys locked up, and he pointed into them and he said, "Now, Louis, someday you're going to end up like these 2 guys, and they have lost the most precious thing in their life, freedom." And my brother said, "Well, we got to get him interested in something else, sports or something." And the chief of police suggested running. He said, "We've been chasing him all over town. I think he's in shape for running." So then I had to make a commitment to my brother that I would go all out to become a runner. So I quit my delinquent ways. I quit smoking and drinking and chasing around, and I became just as fanatic as a training athlete. My life was immaculate from that time on.
Huh. Now, you went far with your running. In fact, you ran right into the Olympics at age 19, which also happened to be the one that was hosted by Germany and attended by Adolf Hitler. What was it like to be so young and part of such an important world event like that?
Yeah, well, I hadn't planned on making the team because I was just out of high school, and I was a miler, and there were 5 great milers in the nation, so if you're not in the first 3, you're out. So I stopped training until the second-best 5,000-meter runner came to California to run. My brother said, "You got 10 days to train for this longer event. I've never run it before, and I just want to see how close you can get to a fellow who will make the team." And so I got in the race. I didn't expect to be even close to him, but I was on his tail all the way. And I passed him, he passed me, and I passed him, he passed me, and it was unbelievable. And I thought, well, he's going to leave me behind. And the last 110 yards, I left him behind. And I came down the home stretch, and the officials were trying to get this guy off the field. We were lapping, and they had him go off the wrong way right in front of me. We collided. I went down, hit the turf, and my opponent now was ahead of me, and I had to catch him again. But he beat me about an inch.
Wow.
So I knew I could beat him, which I did in the Olympic tryouts. And then on the strength of that performance, at the time of the race, I got an invitation to the Olympic tryouts in New York. So I took the train to New York, got on Randall Island, got in the 5,000-meter, running against the world's record holder, Don Lash. And my brother said, "All you got to do is get behind him and keep your eyes on the back of his head." And I don't know, I couldn't pass the guy because I'm a kid. How do you pass a world champion? But I waited too long. The last 220, he was out in front, first lane. His teammate was in the second lane. So I had to run the last 220 in the third lane, which means I ran about 12 yards further. And coming down the home stretch, I caught him, and we hit the tape in a dead heat. And that put me on the team.
Yeah, it was an amazing race. I actually saw the archival footage of that. Incredible. After the Olympics, you enlisted and served during World War II, and this is where your story of heroics and survival really begins. I understand it was a B-2 bomber that had been lost, and so you and some other soldiers got into a Green Hornet, and that eventually crashed at sea, and only 3 of you survived, and you ended up in a life raft, lost at sea, with really very little chance of ever being rescued or even to survive. So just give us a couple of, thoughts about the events that took place over the 47 days when the 3 of you were lost at sea in a life raft. What happened and how did you survive?
Well, there was 3 out of, I think there were 11 guys aboard. 3 of us survived. And you have supplies aboard. You have a special chocolate that you take a little lump about a half-inch square and you let it melt in your mouth for 30 minutes to get the value out of it. There was enough chocolate on board in 2 rafts for 3 men for almost 2 weeks. And the first night we slept on the raft, the tail gunner panicked and he ate all the chocolate. We got up in the morning, it was gone. And so we started our drift of 47 days, and a bomber flew over, but even though we fired flares, they didn't see us. And that was the last friendly plane we saw. And now we're drifting out towards Japan, west towards the Marshall and Gilbert Islands. We have a 2,000 stretch of water without any islands. And when we realized we were out there alone and there was no chance for rescue, we caught an albatross and figured this was our first meal. But after opening the bird up, we just couldn't stand the smell and we couldn't eat it. So we just took the breast muscles and used it for bait to catch fish. But the sharks, they would take the bait and the hook and some of the line with them. So eventually we lost all of our hooks to the sharks. They were a real pest, and they were our worst enemy at sea. Then about a week later we caught another albatross and we tried to eat that. And we couldn't eat that, but we had to force down a mouthful of the breast. And then the 3rd week we caught another albatross. I can tell you, this one tasted like hot fudge sundae with whipped cream on it. It was delicious. That's how hungry we were. And then we drifted on to the 27th day, and we saw a plane, twin engine, twin tail. We identified it as a B-25. So we shot flares in the air, water dye in the water, flickered our mirrors, and the plane descended, and we thought, well, we're rescued. We'll be eating dinner with the Marines tonight on Palmyra Island. And as we were waving our shirts in the air, the plane made a pass, and bullets come streaming down all through the raft. Then I got a better look at the plane. It looked like a B-25, but it had a red circle on the wing. So we identified it as a Japanese Sally bomber. And they spent 30 minutes flying back and forth, strafing us. And there's 3 of us together in this raft. And it's hard to believe, 48 holes between our crotch, missed our ankles by 1/8 of an inch, armpits, 48 holes, and no one touched by a bullet. And that was fantastic. And then they made another circle, and this time they came by with the bomb bay doors open, and they dropped a depth charge, and the bomb was improperly armed and sank to the bottom without exploding. So then they went back to their base. Now, up to this time, we had a lot of hope. Now, to me, hope is the power of the soul to endure, but now our hope turned into faith. And faith must have an object, and the object was that plane, where it came from, how fast it flew, and how much time they had to kill over us, a half hour. We were able to mathematically figure out how far we were from land. I picked the 47th day, the pilot picked the 46th day. We saw land on the 46th day, and we were picked up on the 47th day by a Japanese patrol boat. And that started our captivity with the Japanese.
Now, on the raft, I remember part of the story is that you would catch sharks with your bare hands and then eat their livers. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's always 2 of them circling the raft. All they do is circle the raft all day long. And finally, the other 2 guys were sleeping. I decided to reach in the water and put my hand over their head and let it go over the dorsal fin. And it was just being one with nature, and it felt like it. And so I did that to one shark, and I did that to another shark. And then the weirdest thing happened. They both disappeared. And then I kept looking for them. I was on my knees. And as I was looking over the side, this one comes shooting up like a torpedo out of the water with his mouth open right at my head. And I threw my hands up in front of my face, and of course their nose is about a foot in front of their mouth. So fortunately my hand hit the nose and pushed him back in. Then the tail gunner grabbed an oar. I grabbed an oar. And for the next, I'd say 10 minutes, we were using the oar to poke them in the face to keep them out of the raft. Once they get in the raft, they can bite you and take you on. So we did that for about, maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes till the sharks gave up. And then they didn't hang around. They just disappeared, which was unusual because there's always 2 sharks circling the raft.
Wow. What an incredible story.
I was so mad at those sharks. What they did, I told my buddy, we're going to make them part of our food chain. And so I watched for a smaller shark to come by, and finally a 5-footer came by, and I grabbed him by the tail. Before I could get his tail out of the water, he pulled me into the water. And I got back out in a hurry. And then I looked for another smaller shark, a 4-footer, and I got him by the tail. I quickly pulled his tail out of the water, pulled him back into the raft, and the first thing they do was open their mouth. And we had a parachute flare cartridge, and I had the pilot shove that in his mouth. As they clamp down, they don't open their mouth again. Then I had to rip them open, and 20% of the shark is liver. And before World War II, that's what they made vitamin pills out of. And so on this occasion, we had a luscious dinner of raw liver. A few days later, I caught another smaller shark, 4-footer, and again we had liver. So we had 2 bloody, luscious meals of heavily fortified, mineralized, vitamized liver.
Oh, my goodness. So not just the physical survival on the raft, but the mental aerobics that you did is what in part kept you guys alive as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the things that you did in order to keep your mental physique going to endure the 47 days? Yeah,
well, when you see a movie about people on life rafts, they're always hallucinating, but there's no reason to hallucinate. In fact, after 47 days, we were keener and sharper than any day of our life by memorizing things every day, teaching each other words to songs. This went on and on, reminiscing how far back can you think? What are you going to do after the war? There was always something to keep our minds active, and that's the secret. And so after 47 days, we're picked up by the Japanese. And to prove what my theory, we were able to outwit 6 highly skilled Japanese interrogation officers, only because our minds were clear and free. And I say clear and free, the day we crashed, before we crashed, we're in the world, a world of confusion and chaos and so forth. And then the next moment, we're on a raft, and our minds are completely free of the world and the things of the world, and we have a new clean input. We can put in our minds whatever we want to. And what we did, we talked about good things, pleasant things, memorizing, words of this, words of that, stories we told each other. And when we finally started running out of stories, then they wanted me to cook meals for them. So I had to cook meals. I'm talking about the exact measurement of ingredients, how many drops of vanilla, how many teaspoons of powder, how much of the oven, 400 degrees, and so forth. So at the end of 47 days, we were keen and sharp.
Now, which is truly incredible. Now, you finally found land after 47 days at sea, but it wasn't the relief that you thought it would be. So talk to us about what happened when you couldn't even walk and you could only crawl up onto the beaches of this foreign land.
Well, we were picked up like a sack of wheat, thrown over the Japanese shoulders and carried from here to there. Weighed in at 30 kilos, 65 pounds about. And then we had to be carried to a ship the next day and dumped into a room on the ship. And then after a day and a night, we were taken to an island called Kwajalein. And of course, Kwajalein was always known as Execution Island. All prisoners that were captured in the Pacific, if they're sent there, they're executed. And here we are, Kwajalein, a little cell about 28 inches by 6 feet by 7 feet, with a hole in the floor, which is our bathroom. We did get 3 cups of water a day, which didn't do us any good because we had constant diarrhea. The water on the raft, when we drank it, it did us good. but the water here just went right through us, so we were suffering more from dehydration on land than we were out there in the ocean. We were interrogated over and over again. They were used as guinea pigs. I think 3 or 4 different times they injected us with something until our bodies broke out in red welt and we passed out. And then after they got all the information they wanted out of these experiments, and then they set a day of execution. But what made it even worse here, we could just barely stand up by now. But then I looked out the little crack in the door, and there were about 80 guys in line, and I had no idea this was a submarine transit base. And these submariners came by one at a time, looked in, screamed at us, spit on us, threw a rock at us, or jabbed us with sticks. Well, thank God that finally ended, but a week later another submarine came in and the same thing was repeated. So this was a real hellhole, far worse than 47 days on the raft. In fact, I wanted to be back on the raft where I could die in a clean atmosphere, beautiful sky above, and a good clear ocean. That was my thought, my dream, and my wish.
Now, meanwhile, Louis, back in Torrance, California, your family had been told that you had died. In fact, the newspapers had printed that you had died, and I think there was even a death certificate signed by President Roosevelt that you had died. So all this was happening back at home while you're enduring these great atrocities as a POW. Now, eventually you were moved to a POW camp in Japan. Is that correct?
Yeah, right.
Can you tell us what happened after that?
Well, my folks at home, my brothers and sisters, we suffered in prison camp, but it's a different kind of suffering and probably even worse than ours, and that's the family at home worrying about you. They really suffered. I was finally sent to Yokohama to a secret prison camp called Ofuna, back in the hills of Yokohama.
Now, there was one man in particular at this POW camp who tortured you and did heinous acts, and I understand his name became to be known as the Bird. And this is a man who haunted your dreams for years, even after the war had ended. I think probably even the greatest atrocities you faced were in this POW camp. Can you tell us a little bit about the circumstances of that?
Yeah, well, first of all, to make things clear, the first camp is a high interrogation camp. They get prisoners shot down Friday, they interrogate them Saturday. A month and a year after I was there, a year and a month, I was transferred to a headquarters camp. It takes a year and a month before our government declares you dead. So they were waiting for me to be declared dead. Then they sent me to a headquarters camp, and from there they wanted me to do radio broadcast, propaganda. I was taken into Radio Tokyo, allowed to make my own broadcast the first time to my parents, and then the second time they took me in and said, read this. Well, it was propaganda. I said, I can't read it. They said, you must read it. I said, no way I can read it. So then they said, I think you will go to punishment camp, meaning a slave labor camp. So in the meantime, I think the Bird was given orders to, lay it on to me every day and try to convince me to make the broadcast. So I was constantly beaten almost every day. And I tell you, this guy was not only brutal, but he was a psychopath. And one day he came into the building and he's looking around for me, and I'm way in the back hiding. And after about 10 seconds, he spots me, and he said, oh, you, Zamperini, you come to attention last. He didn't even see me for 10 seconds. Come up here. I came up there and took a big, wide belt off. His belt is about 5 inches wide, about a half-inch thick, with a great big steel buckle on the end. He whacked me over the temple with it, knocked me on my side on the ground, and I don't go down easily. But that did it. And then he handed me a piece of toilet tissue, and he said, oh, like I'm sorry. I thought, well, he can't be so bad. So I picked up the tissue, and I wiped the blood. And I thought, well, he's not that bad after all. I stood up, and I started to look at the blood on the toilet paper, and he hit me again. Down I go. So I stayed down. And that was par for the course with this guy. And then he's transferred, which made me happy. Then a week later, I'm transferred with a couple other buddies to a northern camp. I walk into this camp, told to stand at attention and face the guard shack. And after about 10 minutes, out walks him, the Bird, Watanabe. I tell you, my knees buckled. I almost went down. I thought, man, it's useless. There's no escape from this guy. And so I had him till the end of the war. And And he was classified as a Class A war criminal, should have been executed. But he knew the war was over before we did, and he, like the bird, he flew the coop and hid out in the hills until amnesty was signed, and he came home alive, became a millionaire, working for his parents, and so he came out pretty good. But then again, I tried to get back to Japan to see him after I got home from the war. Because of him, I had nightmares every night. My life began to fall apart, and my marriage was breaking up. And then my wife went down to hear Billy Graham and came home speaking of the change in her life. Wanted me to go down to hear him, and I refused. But finally, she convinced me I should go down. And I said, well, on one condition, when he says every head bowed and every eye closed, I'm out of there. Well, down we went, but he said something when I was leaving. When people come to the end of their rope, there's nowhere else to turn, they turn to God. Well, that's what happened on the raft. Nowhere else to turn, we turn to God. And I thought, yes, and I made promises that if God got me home alive, I'd seek him and serve him. Here I am alive, and I never did keep my promise. And so I went down to the prayer room and made a confession of my faith in Christ. And boy, before I got off of my knees, I knew it was all over. I'd forgiven the guards. I'd forgiven the bird. I'm through getting drunk. I have a whole new life, and that was a new life that finds me here today.
When I read your story, Louis, I mean, doing my own self-reflection, I don't think, and I consider myself to be pretty self-confident, I don't think I could have endured. I just don't think that I would have been able to have the mental, let alone physical stamina to have gone through what you went through. What was it deep down inside that kept you from giving up in those dark hours? What was it?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. It's your athletics training, the coaches teach you the same thing. You're up against some real severe obstacles like the greatest runners in the world, and they became great because they never gave up. And so when you get in a race, give it all you got. Overcome the situation and try to become a champion or winner. Now, you don't have to be a world champion athlete or an Olympic athlete to have that quality. Anybody that wants to overcome an adversity, when you do overcome an adversity, you become more and more hardy. And that was my generation. I don't like the term the greatest generation. I like the term the hardy generation, because each problem you overcome, you become more and more hardy. And then, of course, all your training. This is essential. If you're going into the wilderness or climb a glacier, go at sea in a boat, learn survival on land and sea. And I had taken many courses. I even took an advanced course in first aid at USC. In Hawaii, I took a course on the South Pacific. Out of 30,000 soldiers in Hawaii, only 15 of us showed up for the course. But believe me, that was a life-saving course. So when you have all this life-saving knowledge in you, yeah, you're anxious to use it to see if it works. So I think that keeps you from thinking about giving up. As long as you have some tools at your disposal to survive with, yes, I think you'll go all out and go for broke.
One of the reasons why this is a great honor, Mr. Zamperini, is that my grandfather, too, was a World War II combat fighter pilot who flew in the South Pacific for the Navy, did 100 combat missions, and was decorated, and he passed away 3 weeks ago. So, and I never got a chance to really engage him in a dialogue as deeply as we're having even right now. So, what advice would you give someone from this generation if they are feeling like giving up right now, for whatever reason and for whatever circumstance they're facing, which I'm sure is not even a shadow of a fraction for the consequences and circumstances you faced, but what advice would you pass down to somebody in the younger generation right now who's feeling like giving up?
Well, if they feel like giving up, then they don't have any respect for themselves. My theory is, and I've proven it over and over again, when you want to overcome anything, you have to be fully committed to it and then overcome it. And when you overcome it, as I said before, my motto is be hardy. And the more you overcome adversity, the more and more hardy you become. But for self-respect, yes, I don't see how anybody can back off from a challenge. Take the challenge, whether you win it or not. You'll learn by it, and you'll expand by it, and you become more hardy by it.
As you went through the different phases of this incredible, difficult journey, what was the toughest part? And, who was your inspiration, or what was your inspiration as you went through that? Did you have any mental anchors of whom you were fighting for. And what was the most difficult part about the whole journey?
Well, the most difficult part, of course, is being away from your family, knowing that they're suffering back home, and they did suffer. When I came home, the press came to interview me. I'd gained my weight back. My brother was in the Navy. He went to AWWII to come up and see me, and he worried about me for 2.5 years to the point where he was a skeleton. And they grabbed him to interview him as the POW because I'd gained my weight back before I got home. So that's ironic, and it was such a the greatest thrill of my life was coming home and seeing my family, all of them together at one time at the airport. That was beautiful. When people ask me questions about the hardest thing that happened in my life in the Pacific was coming home from repatriation. I stopped off in Okinawa for a couple weeks to gain weight, and then I stopped in Manila for another week to gain weight, and I finally got to Hawaii, and my mother screaming for me to come home to the General Arnold. And my General Arnold got fed up because of being pestered, so he sent me a red letter order, and get your tail back here with every available dispatch. So I finally got home, and but I'll never forget when I started to terminate at San Pedro. You see, my parents were paid my $10,000 life insurance policy because I was declared dead. They saved the money. When I got home, they mailed it back to the insurance company. The insurance company sent it back to us saying that you deserve this money because your son's death was no fault of his own, whatever that means. So then the finance officer at San Pedro said, well, I think you're also entitled to travel pay on the life raft. I said, really? He said, yeah. He filled out a paper and made me sign it. About 2 weeks later, I got a letter back from the War Department, and I requested, $7.50 a day for 47 days. And the letter only had one paragraph on it, and it said, travel unauthorized. So my life raft trip was unauthorized.
Wow, that is incredible. So you've obviously been interviewed so many times as a result of this Pulitzer Prize-winning book that has come out, Unbroken, which is written about your life. What did you think about the book, and how did it portray your story, in your opinion?
I think the toughest thing that I've been up against is people that read Unbroken and say, oh, I just loved your book. Well, it's not my book, it's Laura Hillenbrand's book, and she did a job that I don't think anybody on earth could do. Her research is so meticulous, and she has everything tabulated. And it's the only book I've ever read where I could only read a chapter a day because every chapter I felt myself back in prison. And so after about one chapter, I'd have to look out the window to be sure I was back home. And then people that write me letters say the same thing. I had no idea what your prisoner life was like until I read Laura's book. When you read it, you are there. And that's the way she writes, you are there. And the fact that she's suffered all her life, she can relate keenly with our way of life and the suffering we had in prison camp.
So did you ever imagine that the book would do so well and it's going to be made into a movie?
Well, I knew it would be good, but I didn't think it would exceed Seabiscuit, but it did. And so Universal's got really hot on this now, and they're trying to put the package together. And if I'm around, I'll probably be a consultant. But it takes almost a year, I guess, to put the package together, and then another year to make the movie. And I told them, I said, hey, guys, I'm 94. Let's get this thing rolling.
Fantastic. So just one last question for you today, Louis. After everything you've been through, what's the one legacy you want to leave behind, or the thing you want to be remembered for the most? I
think the story of Laura's book is a total answer to what I would like to see everybody be. Overcomers, overcoming adversities. That's what life's all about, just one adversity after the other, and we either learn to overcome it or give up. And when you give up, of course, you're a total loss. You've backed away, and you've accomplished nothing.
Louis Zamperini, this has been a truly memorable experience for me, and I'm sure the listeners here at Success. Your life is a shining example to us all that you can truly overcome anything with the right attitude and a little faith. Thank you very much for sharing your incredible story with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Success Magazine Audio. Copyright Success Media. All rights reserved.